young research assistant named Indiana Jane reported to the curator of her museum about the ruins she had just explored, and the Longmon Queen's tomb she had just raided. The curator was particularly happy to see that Jane had returned with the Queen's scepter, a priceless relic from a time when humanity was enslaved by the elves. It was a treasure of immense value, and might even possess magical properties. Jane told the curator every detail she could remember about the ruins and the treasure they had recovered. Much of it had gone to the other members of the party that had accompanied Jane, but she thought it prudent to inform her boss of everything that had been recovered. Theo Davos, the halfling curator, listened quietly as she told him who all got what. When she got to Rafe, she paused. Davos, observant as always, asked her what she was thinking about. Jane explained that she had discovered something about Rafe in private. He hated elves more than anyone Jane had ever seen, as though he had personally been enslaved by them instead of his ancestors. Yet when Jane had gotten a glimpse of his ears, she found that they were pointed. He was either fully elf himself, or half-elf, which made him a dreaded Longmon. "Very curious indeed," Davos said. "Do you think he is dangerous?" Jane thought carefully before shaking her head. "Annoying, yes. Chauvinistic, rude, and childish, but not dangerous." "Good, because you will need him for your next task," Davos said. "And this intriguing development could prove helpful." Indiana Jane looked at Davos confused. As if answering her baffled expression, a large, hulking shape emerged from the shadows. It was wearing the modest cloak of a religious pilgrim, with the hood draped over its head, its face shrouded in dark mystery. It hesitated a moment, then, in one swift motion, it reached up and pulled back the hood, revealing its face. Indiana Jane recoiled at its hideousness. Sharp, gnarled teeth emerged through its snarling mouth. A pig nose separated its beady eyes. Its green skin wrinkled between each feature as though it was 2 sizes too large for its skeletal frame. Strands of its thin gray hair barely covered its head, and its neck was made up of rolls of skin that billowed over one another. Indiana Jane instinctively pulled her bow, and it was ready with an arrow in an instant. Davos remained calm, and assured Jane that there was no reason for fear. This was a pilgrim of the world who had sought guidance at the Piety of Animus, a church of the god St. Cuthbert. "His name is Flower, and he wants to do right for the world," Davos assured. "Friend," Flower announced. Jane relaxed her bow, but eyed the monster suspiciously and said nothing. "He's originally from the city of Gavash, where some descendants of the beasts of the south still reside, the remnants of a bygone age. Aware of his ancestors' crimes against humanity, Flower has sought penitence, and has been studying at Justice Cathedral in Pyrrhus." "Good for him," Jane said, still not letting on any warmth. "Why is he here, then?" "During his studies in their archives, Flower made some fascinating discoveries. The most relevant to us involves the possible location of the Temple of Kodam." "That was within the lost city of Nan-Salvath," Indiana Jane said in awe. Davos nodded, smiling. "You find the city, you find the temple. You find the temple, we find the Medallion of Lost Hope," Jane finished. "One of the most holy relics of the Longmons," Davos added. "Where?" Indiana Jane asked, looking at Flower. "Flower not know," Flower said, shrugging. "He hasn't found the city itself yet," Davos explained. "He's found the place where you could find it." "Chapel o' Dudu," Flower said. "That's its name in the Orcish tongue," Davos said. "The Longmons called it Frazi Chapel. Humans named it the Chapel of Doom. It was a place of sacrifice, a sacrament of death." "But the location of the Temple of Kodam is inside it?" Jane asked. "Yes," Flower said bluntly. "Flower take you there. Now." And so the party, now 5 members strong, set out along a northern path used by farmers and merchants along the Rebus River. Before they had left, however, while Indiana Jane had been speaking with the curator, the others had gotten a chance to look around the port town and purchase items with the treasure they had taken from the tomb. Bob had looked around at the many trade posts that sold wares brought in from the river towns across the continent. He had found some armor made of tough shells from the ocean that was in better shape than his outdated chainmail. It was made of a special material only crafted in the north called a Lucian clay. He had also picked up a dwarven brewmaker for libations on the road, and got his axe sharpened. Rafe had gotten enough arrows to last him a long time, and a special quiver that had a hidden scabbard within. He had also picked up some survival items, such as a sparker, an insect net, and some fine wine, which he would not go without. Diomed had looked through various relics at the museum and saw many he would like to purchase one day, when they had raided a tomb that had more gold still inside it. But for now, he picked up a hand-sized gem that had a glow emanating in it. It cost him everything he had, but the gemstone held within it a daylight spell which could be cast once a day. Diomed had also studied the spell book he acquired, which had a number of spells written in an cryptic magical language and blank pages where he could add some. He had translated a bunch of the spells and would have to translate the others along his adventures. One of them was a spell called Imprint, which gave the caster the ability to memorize text and images and transfer them to blank pages. Another gave him the ability to conjure a glowing writing quill with limitless ink, so he could store these new spells in his book. A few hours' march brought them to Osbranch Creek. They noticed a small building to the side. Rafe sighed with annoyance, a toll for the bridge. Everywhere he went was becoming so civilized. Jane was beginning to go through her coin purse to see if she had enough to pay for everyone, but Rafe stopped her. "I've got this," he said with a wink, and he approached the small building. He had not stepped far toward it when he noticed a small splatter of blood on the window. It was faint, but he recognized it as such, and it was unmistakably blood. "Take cover!" Rafe shouted as he dropped into the tall grass. Diomed and Jane jumped for cover without hesitation, but Bob was slow to react, and Flower simply looked around them confused. Arrows emerged from the tall grass and from behind trees. One flew just over Bob's head, and another struck into Flower's arm. Rafe and Jane answered back with arrows of their own, taking down one of the bandits. This left 4 more to go. At last aware of what was going on, Flower broke the arrow in his arm and ran his hand over the wound, healing it with the faith of his god. Having just recovered from his wound, he saw another arrow coming at Bob, and he stepped in the way, taking another hit. Bob, meanwhile, got into the grass and crept his way up toward the bandits. Rafe and Jane each managed to take down a bandit. Bob managed to get up close enough that he was able to leap from the grass and knock down a third. The last one, having seen all this and unable to kill the large creature with their mark, fled the scene. Bob did not bother to chase the runner. He had someone down, but not dead. Outraged at the cowardly ambush, Bob raised his axe ready to take off the bandit's head, but Flower stopped him. "He must see the wisdom and justice of the Lord, St. Cuthbert." Bob was breathing heavy. He was angry and vengeful, but the looks on the others' faces and the intimidating size of Flower convinced him to hold back. Flower stepped up to the half-conscious bandit. He laid his hand down on her gently. "You're not going to heal her, are you?" Diomed asked. "We'll have to fight her again." "I bring out goodness in bandit," Flower said, placing one hand on the bandit's arm and another on her forehead, as though checking her temperature. The young woman blinked awake. She looked wearily at Flower, relieved that the clubbing Bob had given her had not ended her life. She may just have a second chance. Then Flower pummeled her across the face. "I heal ya!" he shouted. He then brought his other fist down on the side of the bandit's head. "In the name of the Lord, I heal ya! Out, down, old demons that force your will upon this woman!" Flower was beating down on the bandit's head with all his might as he shouted, "Fly from this woman's spirit, and let the power and the glory of St. Cuthbert be upon her!" The head caved in, and blood splattered from the corpse. All of Flower's teammates looked on in horror as he continued to smash the bandit's head in the name of his loving God. And when he was done, and there was little remaining of the heathen's head, he stood up, blood dripping from his hand, and he said, "St. Cuthbert now works through her. She is healed. It is time we move on." Several leagues on, Flower stopped them quite suddenly. Looking down, he kicked away some dirt and revealed stone slabs, an old, forgotten road. "It's close," he declared. Rafe leaned down to study the cobblestones, then noticed a scent in the air. "Someone's campfire is nearby," he said, lowering his voice. The others sniffed the air, but no one else noticed it. He hurried them across the road into the woods beyond, following his nose. There they crept slowly forward until they could see the other side. Sure enough, a campfire was smoldering on the other side, and a lone man, dressed much like the thieves they had encountered at the bridge, was standing in an almost fetal position, rocking back and forth. Bob grasped his axe, preparing to pounce, and Diomed stopped him. "He doesn't look dangerous," Diomed whispered. "He's a thief," Bob hissed. "Like the others. He must die." "At least we need to knock him out," Jane agreed. "He might have friends." "His friends might be in the tents," Rafe whispered. "We should have a plan of attack." "Where's Flower?" Diomed asked. As though on cue, Flower emerged in the clearing before them, asking the stranger boldly, "Have you heard the word of our Lord and Savior, St. Cuthbert?" "Just kill me," the man said. "Get it over with." Flower stared at him blankly for a moment. then said, "Okay," and stepped toward him. Jane leaped from the woods at that moment, shouting, "No, no, there's no need to die, especially when you might have some information that's useful to us." The man looked confusedly at Jane. For that matter, so did the others who had come out of hiding. "We seek Chapel Adudu," Jane said. The very name made the man shake with fear. Tears began rolling down his face. "So you've been there," Diomed said. "The Chapel of Doom," the man said. "That's the one," Diomed said without much empathy.
"Where is it before I cut out your throat?"
Bob threatened. "The sleepless dead," the man continued, shaking. "They took my friends."
"You want to join them?"
Bob asked, showing his axe. "Just beyond that line of trees," the man said without spirit. "You spell your own doom if you go." "Why are you still here?" Diomed asked. "I'm awaiting my other friends who went to the Osbranch Creek Bridge." Everyone shifted, a little uneasy. "We've got some bad news for you there, buddy," Rafe said. The man then noticed the blood on Bob's axe.
"You have bad day,"
Flower said. The group debated among themselves as to whether they should tie the man up or send him away. They didn't want him to sneak up on them from behind, but they also considered the fact that tying him to a tree might be like a death sentence if they weren't able to come back for him. Then Flower solved their problem again by knocking the man unconscious. He then looked at Rafe and said,
"Get me a bunny."
While Rafe was out hunting a rabbit among the underbrush, Jane and Bob went through the thieves' camp. They clearly weren't very good robbers, as they had little of value save for some copper and silver and a couple small chests. Their weapons were crude, except for a dagger, which was finely crafted. Jane added it to her own collection until she realized Diomed had no hand weapon. She handed it to him, and he held it like it was a dead animal. "Don't you want it?" Jane asked. He thanked her awkwardly, and explained that he preferred using magic to the crudity of bladed weapons, but he saw the logic in having something with which to defend himself. Rafe returned with the rabbit carcass and gave it to Flower. Without explaining why he wanted it, Flower tied the animal to his belt and led the way through the tree line in the direction the thief had pointed them. There they immediately came upon the ruins of a small cloister of buildings. The so-called Chapel of Doom should be among them. Once they had all stepped in among the crumbled walls, they learned just why the area had such an ominous name. A scratching sound was followed by undead bodies climbing over the walls and crashing down around them. A few were skeletons, and the rest were walking corpses of the thieves that had once been a part of the camp. They attacked with clubs, knives, swords, whatever they had carried in life and now carried as the walking dead. Bob immediately sprang into action, clutching his axe and jumping toward the horde. The first couple were knocked down with arrows fired by Rafe and Jane. But there were several more, which Bob charged, shouting his war cry, "Gadzooks!" But just as he reached them, they turned and fled, some of them falling to the ground and dissolving into dust. Bob looked on in horror. What had just happened? He turned to see Flower holding his holy symbol aloft. He had used his holy powers to turn the undead creatures and send them fleeing.
"Damn you! Leave some for the rest of us!"
Bob cursed. Flower shrank, emotionally hurt, and Bob climbed over the walls to continue into the ruins. He came upon several more structures, one of which looked important. Its importance was emphasized by the fact that a gathering of skeletons guarded it. Bob smiled at this, and jumped into their midst before the others could arrive and ruin it for him. When they did arrive, Jane and Rafe's arrows were more or less useless against the non-fleshy opponents. Diomed's magic wasn't, however, as he cast Disrupt Undead. Flower was about to turn the skeletons, but Bob shouted back,
"Don't you dare!"
So Flower did the only thing left. He jumped into the fray, club in hand, knocking the skeletons to pieces. Rafe and Jane joined in as well, their bladed weapons less useful, but at least causing a distraction. When at last they were all taken down, Jane looked over some of the bones. She looked past the damage they had done to them to learn what had happened to them in life. These were the sacrifices, she said. These were the animated bones of the people the Longmons killed. Rafe scowled and asked, "How are they moving?" Diomed cut in, explaining, "Some power has been put to them. If their puppet master is not nearby, then it has left a sigil behind to do the deed."
"Then we need to find that sigil and destroy it,"
Bob said. "It's probably in the chapel," Rafe suggested, and they set about searching for it. The walls were so crumbled it was difficult to distinguish them. Diomed sent out his rat companion, hoping that its nearness to the ground would help them in their search. After a few minutes of searching, Jane remembered that the Longmons often preferred to live underground. She told the others this fact, and Bob almost immediately found the entrance carved out of the ground. Dwarves are used to such entrances and exits. He opened the door and led the way down the stairs into the darkness. Bob had no difficulty seeing the details of the chapel. The same went for Diomede and Flower, but the two humans, Indiana Jane and Rafe, couldn't see anything beyond the dome of light given off by their lanterns. They did, however, spot the blue glow of the ghosts in the room which hovered at the sides. But only those who could see in the dark spotted the black apparition which stood at the front near the altar. The humans saw only two faint red dots, the glow of its eyes. Flower grasped Bob's axe by the handle before he could charge forth and said,
"There's nothing you can harm here, small man."
Bob was flabbergasted and searched for words, but none came as the apparitions converged on him, making his skin crawl white as he pulled away. Flower held aloft his sigil and shouted,
"The power of Cuthbert compels you!"
This worked exceedingly well. The ghost retreated into the walls and disappeared. The rest of the group lined up behind Flower and let him do it one more time. All but one of the ghosts were turned away into the walls. The last raised its ethereal sword over Flower, and Diomede cast an aura of protection around them. It worked, and as the sword came down on Flower, it was diverted by the unseen shield. Flower now grabbed the ghost by the neck and shouted in its face,
"You will feel the power of St. Cuthbert! In his name I heal you!"
Clerical energy soared through his hand, and he healed the ghost, thus causing it to dissolve into nothing. That left only the wraith at the end of the chapel, floating, waiting. Flower and Diomede stepped toward it. They felt a cracking under their feet, and found that they were walking on bones. A deep, breathing sound emerged from the front of the room, and soon more apparitions appeared out of the walls, summoned by the wraith. "This'll go on forever," Diomede sighed.
"Not if I get to Urn,"
Flower said, referring to an urn that was at the other end of the room, not far from the wraith. "If you get to the urn, you can stop this wraith?" Diomede asked. Flower held up the rabbit and said,
"I have rabbit."
"Okay," Diomede said. "You'll have only one chance at this. Are you ready?"
"Ready,"
Flower said. Diomede held aloft the gemstone he had acquired from the museum and set it off. A light as bright as daylight filled the room. As though hit by an explosion, the ghost flew through the walls. The wraith was even affected by it, stumbling back away from the altar, and the urn on top of it. Flower took advantage of the opportunity and dashed for the urn, slipping on the bones along the way, but keeping his feet enough to reach it. There he drained the rabbit's blood into the urn. As the daylight faded from the chamber, the wraith recovered, and reacted in horror at what Flower was doing. It reached for him, trying to stop the beast. But it was too late. The apparition was sucked into the urn like a vortex, and disappeared from view.
"Rabbit done good,"
Flower said. Everyone now explored the chapel, searching for clues and treasures. Bob found the ladder, a pile of it collected in an area set aside for offerings. Rafe saw it as well and said, "This all probably belongs to the people who were sacrificed."
"Then they won't be needing it anymore, will they?"
Bob declared, and they divvied up what was there. Indiana Jane came close to the back wall with her lantern and found writing in blood scrawled across the back wall. The others had not seen it with their dark vision because they did not distinguish changes in color as readily. It read, "Thou shalt place no other gods before the one true God." In the center of the O in God, Jane found an inscription carved into the stone. "What do you make of that, Flower?" she asked.
"That unholy sacrament,"
he said. Diomede joined them and looked over the inscription. "That's the sigil I was talking about. Whoever carved it created the wraith and all the undead along with it." "But who did it?"
"Bad guys,"
Flower offered. Jane took a piece of parchment from her pack and placed it against the inscription, then ran chalk across it to get the form on the paper. "This doesn't make any sense," Diomede said. "The Longmons believed in multiple gods as well." "Yeah, but they favored a spider," Jane said, finishing her scratching. "Whoever did this was not Elvish. It's even written in common." Rafe came up from the pile of treasure to tell the others that he found something. "It's folded like a map," he said, "but the drawings are incomplete. It looks like cryptic writing." He took it to the others and placed it on the altar. There they all stared at it, trying to decipher what it said. "This is probably the location of the lost city of Noun Self-Oth," Indiana Jane said. Did you like this video? Then be sure to subscribe to see more and share us with your friends. Also, if you'd like to support us financially or just give us a tip, consider a donation on Patreon. A little donation from each of our viewers helps us expand the videos, keeps the channel going, and helps us make more of them. You also get bonus videos and a big thank you from us. Happy gaming, everybody!